Okay, this is Before the Living God by Ruth Burrows, Carmelite nun who lived up until a few years ago. She lived into the hundreds. I'm doing this book summary and a little bit of a report because she was the one that introduced me to the Catholic Church. I read her other book called To Believe in Jesus. This one's Before the Living God. And I can even pull it out. Here we go. And this is and the message in this book is quite similar to her autobiography. Is that Christ, just as you, all that you feel you have around, all securities, will be taken from you, and you will feel like you're in the dark, utterly helpless. And that's what the monastic life is. That's what the true spiritual life is feeling utterly abandoned in giving oneself to God. Because one can hold onto securities, YouTube, books, the way that one perceives themselves, one can hold on to those and seem to take pleasure in those and live life like that. But for the few really true devout, one enters into that darkness, and it might just come like in solitude or just in the way of life one is, and not pleased with not having pleasure in one's way of life. And one feels like they're being stripped. And so, but the response should be trust in God and not going to other things. And what she says in the 4th and 5th chapter, the 5th chapter is called Groaning in Trial. This is after she enters the monastic life. And she finds that it entails groaning, that she feels utterly helpless in this complete darkness. There's doubts with her vocation. She even asked to leave her vocation, but she stays because she becomes prioress of her community, and she feels obliged because of the damage that could be done. And so, why does she stay if her experience is just without pleasure? And that's the 8th chapter of Christ Lives in Me. Is that she is united to Christ in the cross. And that's the way that we should follow. It's like, even though we feel like we're missing out on everything, we don't feel God's presence, or you might have doubts on whether God exists or not. Everything in the physical or spiritual might be taken away, one's own will. But if one just abandons themselves and starts to live in the way of giving themselves up, and to continue in perseverance of what Christ has instructed, and also living out in charity, of course, to God and to neighbor, that is the way in which we should practice in the abandonment that we are in. So that's a book summary on Before the Living God. It's definitely a bit frightening and scary to enter the monastic life, or that's what the monastic life is ideally for. But for all Christians, it's like a self-abandonment, lack of pleasure, lack of, it seems like everything. But, I mean, the hope that there is the good that one experiences in this life, Ruth Burrows says, is though she had in her life this background of Black depression, which seems to have been fear that she had. And this fear was of her relation with God. It's not confidence, and that's one of her main messages as well, is not being confident in being the son or daughter of God, that he will take care of you, and the reality of God's union with you. But in spite of this utter helplessness of her state, she also has this glorious security. Though one felt she is being held and controlled by the unseen God. And so one of the things that and a lot of the sufferings she had as a kid were the same sufferings that she has in adulthood, in the monastic life. And she always wanted to be held by her parents, though they lacked doing so because they had many kids and many troubles. Ruth Burrows most desired to be held. And at first, even in the monastic life, it was to be held physically. But as she grew, she had this glorious security that she arrived at of being held and being controlled by the unseen God, though without sense, right? In the intellect. So that's the hope there. But yeah, the stress is on the darkness, the abandonment of oneself, if they enter into that. And that is characterizes the lives of the saints. It's not one of pleasure, it's not one of happiness. But there is a security and a control, knowledge of God and his working and doing his will. And by doing so, they'll be united to Christ. And there'll be a greater faith, hope, and charity in doing so.